Today I'm showing you the 10 tips I use to improve my designs, and we're starting right now. Welcome to part 2. Yesterday I recorded part 1, which was tips 1 through 5. Today I'm doing tips 6 through 10, just because I want to split up the video and make it a bit shorter. But anyways, as I said before, these tips are not just practice or spend more time. I feel like those are already given. So anyways, I do stream every day on twitch.tv/mayodesigns. If you want to see me live designing, you can, and ask me any questions there. Anyways, thank you and enjoy the video. Number 6 is creating layer styles. I see a lot of people struggling with this, whether it's adding too much inner glow or the colors kind of look off. But anyways, I'm going to show you how I do my layer styles on most of my designs. So I have my text here. I'm just going to double click the text layer to bring up the layer styles. I'm just going to select gradient. Now I have a bunch of preset gradients. I do have a tip later in the video going over color and what colors you should select and which ones work together. So I'm just going to select this one, or yeah, I'll just select this one. I'll press OK. So now you have your gradient in your green. Now for my 6th tip, I'm going to go over layer styles and how I use layer styles in most of my text. So I just have this random piece of text here. I'm going to double click the layer, which is going to open up the layer styles. I'm going to select gradient overlay, and I have a bunch of preset ones. I have a tip later in the video about going over what colors you should select for your designs, but for now you can use whatever one you want or whatever you decide later. So I'm just going to just select a random one. I think this looks okay, so I'll hit OK. And I have this gradient now, so what I'm going to do is also go to inner shadow. I'm going to change the angle up a bit. I'm going to change the blend mode to overlay. And distance should be 2, choke, and size should all be 0. I'm going to bring it up a bit. You might, sometimes one might look better. I think in this case it actually does. But this is probably totally fine if this is what you're going for. But also if you want to have maybe a texture in the text, I wouldn't overdo it, but sometimes I always think clouds look really good. So what I'm gonna do is I just literally search up clouds. So I found this image, I made it black and white by just hitting Control U and dragging the saturation all the way down. And I'm just going to Alt and click between the layers, making sure they're on top of each other. I'm gonna right click my text layer, hit Convert to Smart Object. Then I'm going to go to my layer with the clouds, and I'm going to see what looks best. A lot of times, depending if you want a darker style or not, but I think I honestly usually pick overlay or soft light. Sometimes even hard light works, but overlay has a bit more contrast to it and adds a bit more saturation. Soft light's a bit more dull, so I'm just going to select that, and I'll change the opacity to around 30. 30 usually looks good. And you kind of get this subtle texture on top. Now when I go over layer styles, it's just, honestly, I see so many people struggling with it. A lot of times I'll see people who have crazy layer styles, like they'll have crazy blurred inner glows and stuff, and it kind of looks like this. But I think just having a 1 pixel stroke here always looks good. And if you want to go super crazy, sometimes I might create a new layer, do the same thing by clicking Alt on in between it and making it over top. And I'll just grab my brush, hit Alt while selecting maybe a really light part of the text or the gradient. I'll just make it a bit lighter, and I'll make it a pretty big brush, and I'll go underneath. I'll just adjust it, but usually I'll add a pretty bright light here. And I might take the color again, make it a bit darker, and brush in the sides here. I'll make sure I have my inner glow checked, but I might do something like that. It really depends what you're looking for, or if you have any lights interacting with the text, but this is something I might do. I might also decrease the opacity a bit, but this is basically it. You can really do whatever color you want, but that's basically how I do my layer styles personally. Now the next tip is trying to help you create better compositions. Compositions is really just the layout of your design, so I'm just going to use a header for example, because I see this mistake a lot. So they might have a headshot here, and a lot of times the headshot is either like super short, like it's not really, it's more heavy at the bottom, so that the player looks almost really short and they're kind of down here. Sometimes the text won't be centered, or they'll have two pieces of text and they kind of won't be aligned, like one might be here, or it'll have it kind of off to the side here. Basically something like this is something I see a lot. Text is kind of just thrown in, not really aligned. So really what I like to do for a lot of my headers, this is basically my recipe for success. I don't know if you have your own, but this is what I do for all of them. So I'll have my headshot. I tend to move it to the right here, but usually you want to make sure you don't want your player head hitting the top here. You usually want to give it about a small gap. Couple pixels is really fine, but you just want to make sure that it's almost touching the top but not entirely. I'll have it to the side here. And for the text, I went over text compositions already, so I made sure I got a really bold text for the name, and I got a smaller and a different text for the support or charge, which is his occupation. So I tend to push it to the right, because if this text is, it's an italic text, so it's moving, it's leaning towards the right. So I'll align this text. You can even press Ctrl R and this will bring out your rulers, and you can click and drag one and it'll create a line. And I'll just make sure that it is literally on the pixel. You can drag it, and I can make sure that this text is perfectly aligned with this text. And always you can also create another ruler and make sure it's at the center. You know it's at the center when it clicks, and make sure that your main text by hitting Ctrl T is always centered. A lot of times this is skewed, like for this text the box doesn't give an accurate showing of where the center is, but you can really eyeball it, and sometimes Photoshop will help you out too, where it'll create this purple outline and it will center it for you. Just make sure that this text is always in the center. I was looking at my first designs and I realized that all my text was never centered. It was actually sometimes all the way down here. Make sure your text is centered. And maybe if you don't have support for charge or like an occupation or something, and you're supposed to put like social media links, make sure that the social media links is always either aligned with the text, centered with the text, somewhat like that, or aligned with the center. If it were right here, never put the social media or the secondary text like up here or somewhere random. Always make sure everything is aligned, and to kind of gives everything somewhat of a purpose. Anyways, that is my general layout for composition. Sometimes I might move the text in a bit. Sometimes I'll align it with the actual vertical center of the header, and I might move the player in, or I might balance it. You can even make sure to pay attention to the size of the player. A lot of people tend to make them super small or way too big, so make sure you at least can see their torso. Sometimes you even might want to make sure that you can see the waist. Sometimes that's a bit too small, but I'll make it this size. Now the 8th tip I have is really mastering and practicing color correction. I know I said I wouldn't say much practicing thing, but color correction and the colors in your designs really comes down to how long you've been working within Photoshop. But here's a header I made without any color correction at all, and I grouped it all in this layer, so I'm just going to show it, and this is after. So here's before color correction and this is after. I think it really increases contrast and also makes the, if you look closely at the blues and the pinks here, it almost makes them a bit more vibrant and changes the tone very slightly. So something I see a lot with a lot of people's designs and a lot of things I point out when I'm reviewing ports is the most frequent thing is it almost looks like they have a crazy offset, or it's almost like the blacks in their headers, like the darkest points in their headers are almost gray. So if I take this and I bring it up, this is probably what I see most times in people's header, and what is wrong is that the blacks almost look gray, and it really screws with the contrast and makes the header almost a bit hazy and look like it's filled with smoke kind of. So honestly, my suggestion is just look at other people's art and look at really well edited and composited images and just see how their colors look. So if you can look at your header and go to the darkest point, and if you can literally hold Alt, sample it, make sure I'm on the right layer here. If I can sample it, the color is pretty far, well, in terms of where black is, it's pretty far away from where black is. So this is a general tip I give to new people, is go to the darkest point of your header, alt click it, see where it lines up, and try to get it as close to either here or just completely black. So if I remove this and I look at mine, this is the darkest point of my header, which is pretty much entirely black, which is basically a success. So if your darkest point is far away from black, you need to change it by either adding a levels adjustment, which is right here in the adjustments thing. Just click levels and bring the slider up, and this will increase the black point. Really, you can do the same thing with highlights. So if I go to the lightest point, I select it, and this thing is pretty much nearly white. If you just go to all the whitest points in your design, oh yeah, I don't even have CC selected. So now that I go to the whitest point, these points are pretty much almost white. This means that your header will have great contrast, and I think looks a ton better. In terms of the actual hue of the color, like I have this blue and pink scheme going on here, what I recommend a lot is going into filter and using the camera raw, which I did on my fourth tip. And the biggest thing is paying attention to the calibration. I think this can take a header with bad colors all the way to great colors, because you really just have to play around with these sliders, all these hue sliders, and it really enhances the color. And sometimes you just want to tune the saturation. So really, and then you just hit OK. And basically I went from having this to this, and if you take away the CCs overall, I went from here all the way to here. So I think that's a huge improvement. I really hope you improvise this into your own designs. Now my 9th tip is really how to get better quality renders and images, and making sure that your renders and images don't look like garbage. I see a lot of people using really pixelated, really small images of players, sort of like this one. You can kind of see that there's really no edge. I mean, you could do all the sharpening you'd want, but I don't think sharpening would really make it look any more decent, because you've already lost a lot of detail. So what I would recommend is using something like Topaz Gigapixel, which is what I use. It is basically a piece of software that you can purchase or you can get on trial that takes your really small images and can stretch it up to 6 times. So, and it also does that without losing any quality. It really just interprets the pixels in between and enlarges it. So I have a code in the description that you can click, and it'll bring you to the site. You can try it out if you want, and then purchase it if you like it. But if you can't get your hands on it, I think there are a couple other options. You can Google it. I'll try to find some myself, but I think Gigapixel probably works the best. Or really just go and find a better picture. There is almost an infinite amount of pictures of players that you are looking for. Most of the time it's through sites like Flickr. I feel like Flickr has a bunch of photo albums, or sometimes the teams you like might put albums on different sites. I know the Overwatch League has their own site with a bunch of player images that I use pretty much all the time. And also, once you get that high resolution image, I just have one here, I will always go to camera filter and correct it. Not all the time will I use the calibration, not really, unless the colors are super screwed up. If there was like a blinding light somewhere and it really screwed up one of the colors or something, but usually I will just play with these options here. So maybe I want to make it a bit less dark. I want to increase the shadows, increase the highlights, and increase the whites a bit. And sometimes, I know it's always a joke that people like jack up clarity to the max. Sometimes clarity looks good. Sometimes I won't include it all. Sometimes maybe, I think this time maybe around 20 I'll play with here. And the temperature, depending if your picture was lit poorly like maybe the picture is really orange or yellow, so you can counteract it with making the temperature blue and the tint purple. But whatever, I think it's pretty good here. I might just make it a tiny bit blue and make the tint here. But I think adding a camera filter, not necessarily these ones because these are headshots and these are professionally taken, but maybe there's pictures on the stage or there's a picture somewhere else. But I think this can really improve, especially when you add on your CCs and your final effects later. It really pays off. So anyways, that was tip number 9. All right, my 10th tip is how to use sites like Adobe Color and Coolers for selecting your own color combinations and how to choose them right. I think a lot of people kind of just blindly pick one color and then choose the other without actually seeing if they kind of combine well together. So this is Coolers. Basically, you can just go to the Explore tab, and people have made tons of color combinations. I'm searching based on the most popular ones. So for example, maybe I like this teal and this red. So all I have to do is literally highlight the color and click on it, and it will copy it to your clipboard. I'll go into Photoshop. I've opened up a layer style on this background here. I'll select gradient overlay, double click the gradient, double click one of the colors and hit Control V right where this hashtag is, and it will paste in the color for me. Then I'll go back and highlight this teal, go right back to Photoshop, paste, and now you kind of have this cool color combo, and it's exactly how they picked it. Because I think a lot of people just kind of pick colors, and sometimes they might not understand what happens when they mix. So once you kind of get to the middle here, it almost forms this gray, which sometimes people don't really like. So what you can do is really drag these points in, and it really reduces the gray area here. When you drag them like really close to each other, it almost looks like pretty much a line. But if you want a smooth grain here, just drag them in a bit and you won't get this gray. Different color combos will give you different reactions. I'll show an example later once I show Adobe Color. I think you will need an Adobe account with this, but if you do pay for Photoshop and their services, you should get this for free. If it is free for everyone, then that's great. But anyways, I just usually go to the trends, or you can go to Explore and literally search a color or a mood, which I think is really cool. So I don't know, think of the most basic mood ever, happy, and it will literally show you pictures of people being happy, and it'll extract colors from those pictures. But I don't think I want to do that, so I'll just search red, and it will literally give you red tones that are very similar to it, or other colors that react very well with red. You can also go to the trends, and it will show you different categories like architecture, game design, and there's even a graphic design. After you do this, go to view more, and it'll have pictures of actual brands and branding projects, and take the colors straight from there. So maybe I like this pink and blue one, so you can just literally click it, go to copy. I'm going to go back to Photoshop, and I'm just going to change the layer styles once again by doing the same thing. So I'm just going to change this to the pink, and I like this blue, so I'm back, change this teal. And really, we just selected a lot more muted colors than what we had before with the red and the teal. So you can see that almost that gray area, it almost seems larger, but it's a lot less notable. So I would really suggest you guys go through these sites, pick the ones you like. I really like Adobe because you can add to library and they'll actually show up in your libraries panel, and you can literally select them right within Photoshop, and it's super easy. So I just go to my library. You can see all the color combos I've selected, and you can do it for yourself. That's basically how I pick the color combos I like. A lot of times I see people only picking like one color for the entire header. I suggest always choosing two that are almost on opposite sides of the spectrum, but they complement each other really nicely. I mean, I could go over how the color wheel works, but there are a ton of videos on YouTube really describing how the color wheel works, but I'm just showing you different tools that I think really help speed up the process and make it look even better than just eyeballing it. And thank you for watching part 2. Appreciate you guys watching this series. As always, go check me out live on Twitch. You can ask me questions there, whatever you want, and thank you guys for watching. I'll see you later.